Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we are absolutely tearing up the history books and completely reevaluating one of the most fascinating collapses in modern history. The story you've probably heard about the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire is, well, it's that it was simply too diverse, it had way too many ethnic groups, and after losing World War I, everybody just naturally declared independence. But I am here to tell you that this typical story is completely wrong. It totally overlooks the incredible, complex reality of how this empire actually functioned and ultimately how it was really dismantled. So we really have to ask the core question here. Why did Austria-Hungary actually collapse? If the textbook answer is that being multi-ethnic and losing a major war automatically destroys a country, then, well, we've got a serious historical mystery on our hands. I mean, the empire had always had a ton of different ethnic groups. It had lost several wars in the past, yet for a really long time, it didn't break apart at all. Okay, let's dive into this. Think about Austria-Hungary, which famously collapsed. But then compare that to the United States, or Belgium, or Spain. All of these countries are incredibly multi-ethnic. All of them are historically rather famous for losing certain wars along the way. And yet, they still exist today. Even the nations that eventually replaced Austria-Hungary, like Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia, were also incredibly multi-ethnic themselves. So diversity and military defeat alone simply do not equal national destruction.
Section 1. Forging the Dual Monarchy.
To understand how this massive empire fell apart, we first have to understand how it was put together in the first place. And spoiler alert, its birth wasn't some triumphant, glorious unification. It was actually a desperate survival tactic by a failing state. It all starts with the Austrian Empire and a deeply outdated concept, serfdom. Think of it as essentially slavery with extra steps. While most of Europe was busy getting rid of this oppressive system in the 19th century, Austria was kind of one of the last holdouts. And holding on to serfdom sparked absolute chaos. Back in 1848, revolutions swept across Europe, and the Austrian Empire was nearly torn apart by people demanding basic rights, chiefly, the right to not be a serf. In Hungary, this actually turned into a full-blown declaration of independence from Austria. Austria managed to survive, but just barely, through a really desperate series of events. First, they brutally crushed the 1848 Hungarian Rebellion, though they totally failed to solve the underlying social issues. Then, they decided to look outward and conquer, but that backfired horribly. They ended up losing disastrous wars to Italy in 1859 and Prussia in 1866. Stripped of their power and influence in Europe, the Austrian leadership realized they were literally on the brink of another civil war. So, lacking external allies, they had to look inward to survive. In 1867, they struck a massive compromise with their largest minority group, the Hungarians, basically elevating them to equal partners. And just like that, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was born.
Section 2. The Golden Age and the Trap.
This dramatic compromise ushered in an era literally no one expected. Giving the Hungarians equal footing brought a massive wave of peace and stability to the whole empire. Because they no longer had to spend vast fortunes on suppressing rebellions, they could finally focus on internal development. And wow, did it work! Between 1876 and 1913, the Austro-Hungarian economy was absolutely booming. With an average annual growth rate of 2.4%, they were the fourth fastest growing economy in all of Europe, keeping pace right behind Denmark, Sweden, and the German Empire. They became an absolute industrial powerhouse, transforming into the fourth largest producer of machinery and the third largest producer of electrical equipment globally. They were rapidly catching up to the modern world.
And the impact on the ground for everyday people was staggering. During this period, it's estimated that the average Austro-Hungarian citizen actually became 3 times richer. 3 times! That is a monumental leap in quality of life. The empire went from this underdeveloped agrarian state to a bustling, industrialized machine that was exporting products all over the globe. But here's where the story gets really fascinating. The empire's leaders realized that the compromise with Hungary worked beautifully to stop rebellions. So they thought, hey, let's start applying this logic to the rest of the empire. Listen to this incredible quote right from an Austrian law. All races of the empire have equal rights, and every race has an inviolable right to the preservation and use of its own nationality and language. They explicitly protected native languages and cultures. Modern research today shows us that giving citizens rights and autonomy creates national stability. Well, the Austro-Hungarian leadership actually figured this out way back in the 19th century.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how incredibly progressive they became, establishing these totally unprecedented new rights. Minorities could go to school in their native languages, government documents, street signs, they were all localized. Almost every major minority group was granted its very own regional parliament to handle local affairs. They even became the most welcoming and open society for the Jewish population in the world at that time. To keep the peace, they built this vast, intricate web of localized autonomy. So, the crucial point to understand here is that this autonomy was a huge double-edged sword. It was absolutely their greatest strength, but it became a massive trap. Because these regions governed themselves, they developed in totally different directions. Austria modernized and heavily industrialized. The Hungarian elites, however, were terrified that industrialization would empower the working class, so they actively suppressed factories and focused solely on agriculture. Meanwhile, a region like Galicia was so poorly managed, it literally suffered famines. The regions were physically and economically pulling apart, held together only by their shared loyalty to the emperor.
Section 3, the Russian domino effect. And then the ultimate test arrived. World War I broke out, and global geopolitics completely shifted the ground underneath the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The First World War was an absolute unmitigated disaster for them. The human toll was staggering. They lost over 2/3 of their army. 1 million soldiers killed, another 1.5 million taken prisoner. The civilian population was literally starving, and worse, to even keep fighting, they had to effectively hand over control of their entire armed forces to Germany. The emperor, whose main job was to unite the regions as the head of the military, suddenly looked completely powerless. Now, what's really interesting to think about here is a core contradiction. If they had lost major wars before, like against Italy and Prussia, as we talked about, why did this specific loss entirely break them? The answer isn't just about the sheer scale of the war. It's actually about a massive geopolitical plot twist happening right next door. It all comes down to Russia. Before 1917, Western powers like Great Britain and France actually wanted Austria-Hungary to exist. They needed a massive, powerful empire in Central Europe to act as a physical buffer against the expanding Russian Empire. But then, in 1917, the Russian Revolution happened. Russia fell into a chaotic civil war, lost territory, and was simply no longer viewed as an immediate threat to Western Europe. So suddenly, the Western powers didn't need Austria-Hungary to act as a shield anymore. With that Russian threat neutralized, the victorious Allied powers completely changed their strategy. Their new goal? Deliberate destruction. The Allies actively conspired to break up the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They realized that a bunch of smaller, fragmented countries would be far easier to influence and control than one massive Central European superpower. Plus, breaking the empire apart permanently stripped Germany of its most powerful ally. Austria-Hungary repeatedly asked for peace, and the Allies just flat out rejected them, specifically because they wanted the empire dismantled. Section 4, a peaceful disintegration.
Which brings us to the surprisingly quiet climax of our explainer. Let's move through this timeline and see how it builds. When the end finally came, it wasn't with a massive, violent revolution in the streets. Throughout late 1918, the empire just evaporated. The Allied powers were actively encouraging minority leaders to declare independence. On October 21st, Austria itself essentially said they were done. On October 28th, Czechoslovakia declared independence, and the central government did nothing. The very next day, Yugoslavia began to form. By November 1st, Hungary was out. Because the empire had spent decades giving these regions their own parliaments and local leadership, they already had the infrastructure to just smoothly transition right into independent nations.
And consider this phenomenal piece of historical irony. On November 11th, 1918, Emperor Karl, the ruler of this vast, sprawling superpower, is dismissed by the Austrian prime minister. There was no bloody uprising against the crown. He didn't even fight back. The central government had just stopped mattering. The emperor simply retired, stepping down to become, quite literally, Mr. Karl. The empire didn't explode. It quietly closed up shop. So let's look at the true causes of the collapse and summarize what we've discovered today. It wasn't just too many ethnic groups. The real culprits were a severe lack of troops from a devastating war, a deliberate Allied conspiracy to divide the region now that Russia was out of the picture, and crucially, the pre-existing regional autonomy frameworks. The local parliaments they designed to keep the peace made it incredibly easy to just simply unplug from the central government. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought to ponder. Did their ultimate solution for peace actually sow the seeds of their own destruction? By giving their people unprecedented rights, local parliaments, and massive autonomy, they created decades of immense wealth and stability.
But in doing so, they inadvertently built the exact machinery those regions needed to walk away peacefully when the world turned upside down. It is a fascinating paradox of history. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope you never